Hey, thanks for joining Gizmike and I in bed for a strictly platonic video. Get your mind out of the gutter. But I'm in Grandpa Joe mode today because I want to tell you about every single book I read in 2023. Yeah, I completed my reading challenge. Thank you to the 30-page poetry collections, the 80-page novellas. I read 50 books, and not all of them were, how you say, good, but according to Goodreads, I gave out an average rating of 3.9 stars, which honestly seems a little bit high, so I thought it'd be fun to go through every single book I read and see if I stand by my initial rating and review, or if anyone needs to be taken down a peg. Cassandra Clare. On star rating because it's apparently divisive. Is it reductive? Probably. So are words like good and bad. I just find it's the most efficient way to quickly, clearly communicate my overall impression of a book. Will two books I rate the same have the same literary merit? Probably not, but I also consider books I just enjoy to have literary merit, so jot that down and, remember that all of my opinions are, of course, objective. It seems most logical to go lowest to highest, so I guess this is kind of a ranking video as well as a wrap up. I am so damn ergonomic. Now I'm not going to include my favorite books of the year, the 10 best books, because I just uploaded a video of those, which is a much more positive video that goes more in depth, is a bit more serious. This is just chill and also probably a chance for me to rant about some of the books I hated. Sue me. And without further ado, buckle up, strap in, hit the like button to go in the draw to win an iPhone 17. Get a snack, get a drink. Ooh, that sounds really good actually. Hold on. Yeah, so looking at my list, I'm realizing that this video is clickbait. Gotcha, you idiot. As mentioned, I'm not going to be talking about my 10 favorites. There were also 5 honorable mentions in that video that I think I'll leave out of this one. And there are 2 more books I'm discounting because they were technically work. They're 2 novels I proofread. Listen, it was at December 27th. I was 5 books behind. What's a girl to do? No need to sigh in relief. Damn, we still got plenty of time together. You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll be talking about 50 books minus the numbers I just mentioned. Someone in the comments do the maths. Einstein, if you're there. I'm not doing the maths. I'm not debasing myself like that on this channel. That's where I draw the line. Okay, let's get into it. 2023 might be one of the only years I haven't rated a single book 1 star, which is a surprise because I'm a deeply critical person. I did, however, DNF a book, which is arguably worse because I rarely DNF books. If I'm going to be a hater, I need to be an informed hater. However, I had to DNF about, I think, 60% of the way through The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Ishiro, a continuation of the Percy Jackson world. This book made me want to stare at the sun until I saw stars and nothing else, definitely not the words on the page. This read like fanfiction, which feels like an insult to fanfiction. The plot was meandering, the character voices were off, the humor was cringy and millennial, often relying on like Gen Z humor and pop culture references, which is a complete step away from the wit of the original series. What was so compelling about the original series is that it gives a voice and agency to children, especially to children who feel different. It's silly and goofy, but it also never underestimates the capability of these characters as human beings just because they're young. And in turn, the young reader never feels condescended to or talked down to. Not to sound like a man with a podcast, but anger and aggression are natural feelings. And I think framing these essential parts of Nico, who is so compelling and was refreshing as this morally grey character, framing these parts of him as trauma-based and kind of changeable and fixable, I think is a massive disservice to the reader. I'm aware this is aimed at tweens. I don't think that's an excuse. I think if anything, children's media needs to explore nuance. So, also, they refer to Percy as straight. Okay. I would rate this 1 star, but DNF. Before I say what I'm about to say, I think we all need to keep in mind that I'm very brave and awesome. I really did not like Happy Place by Emily Henry. I may even hate it. Old Emily and I's relationship is a rocky one, full of ups and downs, highs and lows. It's as inconsistent as the quality of her writing. Okay, I actually think theoretically the premise, the relationship is interesting. Exes just out of a long-term relationship must pretend to be together for one last hurrah with their college pals. It's just that this was a slog that took approximately a million years to get through. I found the pacing intense odd, her quirky side characters forgettable, harboring so much resentment for one another that it was kind of uncomfortable to read that they were still friends. Also, why do her characters end up with the most random fucking hobbies by the third act? I'm gonna stop there, because not gonna lie, Emily Henry fans kind of frighten me, probably due to the massive overlap with Swifties. But I have to speak my truth, and that truth is smash, pass, smash, pass. And if that pattern is anything to go by, her next book should be a smash. Do you remember in People We Meet on Vacation where he called her by the nickname he'd given his kitten whilst he was inside of her? You're on thin ice, girl. Okay. This can stay at 2 stars. I'll report back on the next one. Chain of Thorns is the final in the teacup of serpents and thorns and flames. It's the Last Hours trilogy by Cassandra Clare. And I've got here to show you that I spent my real money on it. This isn't a reading copy. I love to rag on CC, but this honestly felt regressive in terms of her progress as a writer. It was anticlimactic, it was boring, it was uninspired. All of the best characters were absolutely decuntified by the end of this. Everyone was soft and sweet and lovely and a model citizen, and so uninteresting. Cassandra Clare just seems over this world, and it's like, girl, I've been reading about your sexy angel people for over half my life. I know more about them than I do my own family. Imagine how tired I am. Imagine how tired I am. This is absolutely the weakest of the Shadowhunter finales and might be my least favorite Shadowhunter book ever, which is really saying something because I couldn't read the Clockwork series without thinking about how they were all probably pissing and shitting on the streets, and remember all that almost incest? Yeah, so I think I'm gonna have to lower it down to 1 star. Wow. You know how I have Stockholm Syndrome? I can't wait for the next Shadowhunters book. Chop chop with wicked powers, girl. Help me. Rouge is a fairy tale reimagining of a woman's descent into a skincare obsessed cult after the tragic death of her mother. This was trying to do too much. It feels like 5 ideas smashed into one novel. The constant location shifts, the time and memory jumps created a really disjointed pace that became straight up irritating. The titular message about beauty standards and race is a really interesting and worthy one to explore, but it was so ham fisted that it felt condescending. It's also marketed as a gothic novel, and I felt it completely lacked atmosphere in order to be gothic. Just so disorienting, and the mystery suffered because of that. This was my first Outward, and I'm honestly surprised an author this loved and lauded wrote with such a lack of finesse and balance and, dare I say, cringe. Sometimes it just felt like it was being weird for weird's sake, like it was hitting certain beats in order to make those deranged women listicles and sell. I respect the Lynchian concept, what the author was going for. The themes are compelling, but the execution was not. It did really pick up in the last 50 pages or so. I really enjoyed the climax. Also, Tom Cruise as a concept, Tom Cruise as an idea was so fucking funny, and I wish she'd lent more into the absurd. I'm going to stay at 2 stars. Do you think I should read another one of her books? Let me know if you read her other books and if they're better. I think Bunny's the most popular one, right? Maybe I'll give it a whirl. When I started things I'd rather not think about, I thought, oh no, I'm gonna have to lowly rate this memoir about a woman dealing with her twin brother's suicide. And then I realized this is fiction, and that the author just chose to make it boring and contrived. This is about a woman living in a central Amsterdam, and all she seems to do is like knit. Girl, how are you paying your rent? That is my pet peeve in books, and maybe it comes from being broke. When a character is wealthy and it's never explained, they're living in like a high rise in New York, like this had no emotional impact on me whatsoever, and I found it to be very clunky. The metaphors were a lot like when they're not talking about her twin brother himself, they're talking about Joseph Mengele's experiments on twins or the Twin Towers. Let me put it this way, the most subtle reference to twins is an urn reflected in a mirror. It was just very on the nose, and it's sort of told in this fractured style, which honestly I was thinking, is she trying to do a Deborah Levy weaving memory and time and musings, and then the character in this novel reads Deborah Levy? Girl, you're not Deborah Levy, you'll never be Deborah Levy, stop trying to be Deborah Levy. I rated it 2 stars, I'll stick by that, it's a translation. If you read this and enjoyed it, can you please tell me why? I would love to know. Okay, We Could Be Something by Will Kostakis is a dual perspective YA novel about 2 Greek Australian boys dealing with their family dynamics, their place in the world, and their sexualities. I went into this expecting one thing, and I got something completely different that made me very uncomfortable. I'm not going to spoil it, but What was the marketing team doing? It's obvious the author has a deep love and appreciation for the matriarchs of these big first and second generation families, and that was a really beautiful element. I loved the mother character and her relationship with her son, but everything else felt really flat. What I do find interesting about this book is that I had an advanced reading copy, I left a 2-star review, and the next day a bunch of 5-star reviews appeared from newly created accounts. Hmm. 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 That makes me want to rate it 1 star, but I'll keep it at 2 stars as, like I said, I found the family dynamics were quite sweet. Okay. Comadre is a novel in 2 parts set in Buenos Aires. The first part takes place in the early 1900s at an insane asylum as a group of borderline psychotic doctors try to figure out what happens in those moments of brain activity between life and death by doing very unethical experiments and all falling in love with the same nurse. It was weird and gross and strange and dark, and I really enjoyed it. And then the second part, which is about a performance artist. Performance artists are annoying enough as it is. This one was boring on top of that. I just did not get the second part. I didn't care for it. And it just soured the whole reading experience. I rated this 2 stars, which might be a bit harsh considering how much I loved the first part, but I really disliked the second part. So I think it can stay at that. We've got a visitor. Zuko. Oh my god. Zuko, what was your favorite book of the year? Jordan Peterson? Zuko, no. The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane is a romance novel that I found to be offensively charmless. Hee hee. Oh my god. I am never beating the pretentious allegations. I promise I don't hate romance, but I did hate this. It's a gay dating show, producer dating, bachelor type situation. I don't know, man. I thought it was one of the cringiest books I've ever read. And maybe some people want identity explained to them in the most BuzzFeed 2014 GIF way. I know who I am. I don't like who I am, but I know. I guess there were moments of cuteness, but I just found it to overall lack any tension, which I'm starting to realize the only way I like a romance is if there's a borderline psychosexual enemies to lovers arc. Slightly concerning. Moving on. I'm really trying hard to think of something to say, but I truly don't care. So it can stay at 2 stars. There were some cute moments, I guess. Not for me, maybe for teenagers, people just figuring themselves out. Bloodmarked is a sequel to Legendborn, which was one of my favorite reads of last year, but unfortunately lacked a lot of the nuance that made the first so compelling, sacrificing so much for a repetitive, meandering plot that felt like a mashup of all the directions the sequel could have gone instead of just committing to one. Without the atmospheric, historic college campus, the structure crumbled. We jump between half-formed ideas and hollow reveals as quickly as we shift locations. I am sick of YA fantasy authors underestimating the importance of place. When you create place like in Legendborn, this historic college campus with a secret society of training grounds and reincarnated Knights of the Round Table where Arthurian legends come alive, and then take it away from us and replace it with what exactly? That's a character that's missing. Place can be a character, and you just really felt that absence. It was very ungrounded. This is, of course, at its core, Bree's story, but there's another huge, influential character in this that cannot be ignored, and that is the king, not Elvis, Arthur. I understand these books are about so much more than a new take on King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but when you base your premise, your whole world off of these legends, I don't think name dropping and vague insinuations cut it 2 books in. I don't really know anything about the Arthurian legends aside from that homoerotic BBC adaptation, but I just felt like it lent a little into stereotypes, like a Renaissance fair interpretation. Where are the Celtic myths and legends, the pantheon of gods and goddesses? I felt a little more from that time could have been woven into the story. Did Merlin and Arthur ever explore each other's bodies? Things like that. I rated this 3 stars. It can stay at that. I'm tempted to rate it 2, but I stayed up until 4 a.m. reading this, and I do love Bree. She's a very compelling protagonist. I'm definitely going to continue with the series, and I do recommend it. I'm hoping this is just a second book slump. So, All That's Left Unsaid is a novel set in 90s Sydney and follows a young journalist who flies home to Cabramatta to help figure out who has murdered her brother. he was beaten to death in a crowded restaurant and no one will come forward as witness. The mystery of who and why is interwoven with various perspectives from the Vietnamese Australian community. It sounds like a mystery, right? The issue is we have all the answers about halfway through. We also shift perspectives into these almost self-contained short story-like chapters from various community members about their lives. And I found these to be so interesting, and I wish it had committed to a lane, either gone short story collection, this chorus of voices coming together to kind of untangle this horrific event, sort of like Brian Washington's Lot, which is about a low-income neighborhood in Houston, amazing collection, or commit to crime mystery and benefit from the sort of formula, the beats that provides, the structure, because this was really lacking a structure and a commitment. And I just was so frustrated. Like I said, some of those chapters that felt like short stories were incredible and it was a debut, but I don't know. I gotta be honest, super disappointing. I rated this 3 stars. I'm tempted to drop it down to 2, but I'll leave it at 3. A hostel in Ghent, a lovely Welsh girl, gave me a copy of Heaven by Miyako Kawakami and somewhat somberly informed me that it had ruined her summer vibe. Although when I asked what she was reading next, she said The Bell Jar. I hope you're doing well, Queen. This did ruin my summer vibe, and not in like a fun dramatic emo way, in like a okay way. I'm not someone that often has mild opinions, but I am truly winning the IDGAF award with this book. In a Japanese school, a boy with a lazy eye and a girl regarded as ugly and disgusting by her peers are horrifically bullied. Tortured is probably the more accurate way of putting it. One day she sends him a note and they begin to meet in secret. I know I did not enjoy the ending. I did love the atmospheric descriptions of weather and seasons, but apart from that, I just really can't put my finger on how I felt about this book. I usually love detached narrator, coming of age, little plot, but I didn't like this, but I didn't dislike it either. Beautifully written and all the ingredients of something I should love. I just don't think it clicked with me, and it's really rare when this happens, when I sort of feel nothing. But maybe you'll like it. I might try to read Breasts and Eggs by this author and see if I feel any different. I rated this 3 stars, and I think that's an appropriate rating. The Doll's Alphabet is a bizarre, gross horror short story collection, and the first short story might be one of my favorite short stories I've ever read. In it, a woman becomes enamored with this classics philosophy buff who begins to mold her into his ideal woman, and they live in this apartment filled with votives to ancient gods, and soon she falls pregnant and begins to undergo a bizarre physical transformation. So good, it's like Donna Tartt, Mariana Enriquez. Then the same motifs, the same settings and characters began to appear in every story, and the tone just bled and blended until it was kind of a monotonous hum. There were a few gems when the protagonist's world felt most grounded and clear, but on the whole, I don't know, it's a heavily referential work, and I sometimes felt that came at the cost of comprehension. But those more in the know might get more out of this. I just really didn't care to concentrate towards the end. I wanted it to be over. Like I said, a few gems, but overall, not the best reading experience. Perhaps it's because I read it in one go. Better consumed in moderation. I rated this 3 stars, however, her novel, Children of Paradise, was my first 5-star read of 2024. She also just released a new short story collection called The Coiled Serpent, I think, so I'm going to check that out, and we'll see. For the meantime, this can remain at 3 stars. I'm very interested in her, so I'm excited to see what she does next. Flesh is a poetry collection that explores multilingualism, queerness, cultural history, and sort of the immigrant experience. I was expecting a lot from this, maybe too much. I don't know, I just felt that the form didn't match the intensity of the content. I was also reading it at the same time as Richard Seiken's Crush, where the language is so unrelenting and visceral, and so maybe that sort of affected my reading experience. The poet was a fencer, and the title Flesh is a offensive technique. And I think I expected this rhythm of sport, this like parrying, this back and forth to be incorporated a lot more into the collection. And I felt the energy wasn't there. There were certainly some strong pieces, particularly when the mother-child relationship was explored, the motherland, the mother tongue. But overall, I just found that this has kind of faded from my memory. I rated this 3 stars, and that Sounds about right. The Premonition is a recent translation of, I think, one of Banana Yoshimoto's first works. The novella follows a 19-year-old woman from a seemingly loving, happy family who begins to feel as though she is missing an essential memory, some essential knowledge about her childhood. So she seeks out her eccentric aunt who she's always been drawn to. This book is all about existing in liminal spaces, the fracturing that extreme trauma experienced early on can cause. It's about grief and loss and time and memory. It does deal in taboo, which is quite divisive, but I don't know, I think that's the point, where we choose to place our love, the roles we take on or cannot take on, the wires that can get crossed along the way. The more I think about this book, the more I love it. And I rated it 3 stars. I think it honestly might be a 4-star read. It's like a 3.5. I love thinking about this book. So I'll stick by 3, but that might change upon a reread. An Amorous Discourse in the Suburbs of Hell is a dialogue poem by my best friend, Deborah Levy. A fallen angel meets an accountant and realizes the earth is full of suburbs. This was funny at times, containing like one of my favorite passages from any poems I've read. Maybe I'll read it out. Today I will dive under the high-res screen of your smartphone, float in the galaxy of Samsung, swim through Bluetooth and back to ask you, what in essence is an angel? Like, girl, you are so funny. My issue is that as soon as I got into it and kind of got my bearing, it was over. It was so short. I really wish it had been longer. So I was left kind of like, oh, that was it. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed it. I think Deb is so funny. I rated it 3 stars and will stick by that. Sunburn takes place mostly in the final year of high school in a small, conservative Irish village in the 1990s as our narrator's feelings for her best friend become overwhelming, as do the expectations placed upon her by her family, her friends, by society, and the church. Our protagonist shifts and changes with the seasons, and I found the descriptions of internal and external struggle to be so delightfully visceral, sometimes grotesquely so. A huge highlight was the focus on her friendship group, teenage girls, each with their own struggles, and the scary power dynamics that can falter and change at any moment. Seeing this described as a queer normal people, Irish writers will never escape the Sally Rooney comparisons, I fear, and in a lot of ways it is. It's got emotional repression, a class divide, yearning, classic Irish disillusionment. Unfortunately, though, it lacks that meditative retrospection that a well-executed time jump allows. Instead, it feels jammed in for convenience, sudden character development and climax, and I don't know, I guess I'm a bit incredulous at the ending. No spoilers, but to me, the change, the realization is more powerful than any grand romantic conclusion. I think it's why that scene in Call Me By Your Name is so powerful, when Elio is left changed by what he has experienced over the summer with himself. And I don't know, Susanna, the protagonist, is never given that space. I genuinely loved the first 70% of this, and then it began to drag, and it really didn't stick the landing. But I still recommend it if you're looking for a sapphic coming of age. I don't know though, as a lover of that particular niche, I gotta critique it honestly. So I gave it 3 stars, and I'm gonna stick by that. Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory is a short story collection by the creator of BoJack Horseman, and the humor is much the same. It's that same sardonic, satirical tone. Crossing genres, each story highlights the absurdity in human convention and habit, and I was laughing out loud and crying. There's one story from the perspective of a dog. Oh my god, that really got me. Although sometimes the humor veered a bit American, not quite to my taste, I overall just really had a great time. I really recommend this to people who just want an entertaining read, because none of the stories were too complex or hard to get into, and they were all fairly fast-paced. Yeah, what a good time. I rated this 4 stars, and I think that's accurate. Midway through 2023, I fell sick. Not physically, just in the head a bit, and decided to disengage from my life. What better way to do that than to read a YA fantasy trilogy in 12-hour blocks over 3 days? I'm pretty sure I shifted. Is there something on my face? Cruel Prince is popular online for good reason. It's got everything: magical creatures, pretty dresses, political intrigue, enemies to lovers. All their food has MDMA in it. They watch Yuri on Ice at one point. Mermaids, fairies, of course. They also go to Home Depot. Would You Still Love Me If I Was a Worm? And a heroine who isn't afraid to commit murder. Like most YA fantasy, I can't remember what this is about, but I do remember I had such a good time, like a ridiculously good time. And I shouldn't be too surprised because I was a Spiderwick kid. I wore my clothes inside out for a full summer. It's all blurred together, but I'm confident to rate the trilogy as 4 stars. I do think the love interest was slightly boring in compared to the protagonist. I remember thinking that Jude could do so much better. Like, I'm right here, babe. Crimson, also I think titled Last Night in Nook, follows 5 inhabitants of Nook, Greenland, as they experience great shifts in their relationships following a house party. Told in 5 respective parts that weave together a stream of consciousness prose and letters and text messages and ponderings, we learn of each of the characters' movements leading up to that fateful evening, what exactly occurred from each of their perspectives as they deal with the fallout, the wonderful and terrifying consequences. There is a claustrophobia to this novel that had me gasping for more. Greenland only became self-ruling in 2009, and they had an incredibly high suicide rate. Danish rule looms heavily over the characters as they deal with systemic issues typical of colonialism. For the youth of Nook, particularly the queer youth, their relationship with home is bittersweet and complex. I have such admiration for writers who clearly have something to say and can execute their vision without regard for convention. This kind of raw passion, communicated well, is what I find compelling above all else, and Crimson really delivered. There was some discussion of gender and genitals that I felt a little uneasy about. It was published 10 years ago and it is translated. Maybe something was lost in translation, but I don't know, I feel like it lacks some nuance. And certain topics were glossed over when I think maybe they should have been explored a little more. So for that reason, I rated it 4 stars and I'm going to stick by that. I would love for more of this author's work to be translated if there is more. And if anyone has recommendation for Greenlandic novels, please send them my way. Thank you. The Book of Frank is a poetry collection that opens with Frank coming to the realization that his mother will never love him as much as she loves her jars and jars of abortions. And it continues much the same. Told in 3 parts, we learn about Frank's birth, life, and death. I'm here to announce I've entered the Caleb Isuma Nelson verse, and I never want to leave. In his debut, Open Water, a man and a woman meet at a party in London and are inexplicably drawn to one another. But she has a boyfriend, and his friend is her boyfriend. What begins as a simple enough romance ends up doing what the best relationships do, and that is to challenge. A series of triggering events chip away at the protagonist, and we come to understand the complexity of existing in a black body, the stifling vulnerability of being looked at but not seen, targeted and appropriated, and the utter joy in connection and culture. This is one of the most intimate novels I've ever read. It truly feels like the author has sandwiched his bloody, still beating heart between these pages, and not to sound cheesy, but it feels like an honor to be let in on that. Small Worlds, his second novel, has the same vulnerability but with a little more structure, which I wasn't mad about. We follow Stephen, a British Ghanaian man, over various summers in his life from London to Accra as he grapples with his place in the various communities and roles he inhabits, his small worlds. Prose reflects his passion for jazz as we dip and weave through time and memory in this really delightfully organic way. This was so moving. He really has a way of making the mundane poetic and the unique identifiable. What shines through in all of Isuma Nelson's writing is the sheer love he writes with, the deep appreciation for people and culture. It's really refreshing. I rated both of his novels 4 stars as I feel sometimes he can get a little unfocused, a little caught up in his own words and expression and lose the thread slightly. But I feel like it comes from a place of passion. And he's so young. I feel like with experience this will improve, and I really can't wait to see his no doubt meteoric rise. Dark Tales is a short story collection by my mother, the Queen of Horror, Shirley Jackson. I read this after devouring We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which was one of my favorite reads of the year, and was not disappointed. Shirley Jackson is just a master storyteller. Full stop, period. Shirley Jackson's horror is rooted in the most terrifying thing of all, the mundane. Her stories take what you know, lull you into this false sense of security, and then there's a moment in every one of her stories where everything changes, and then it's exhilarating until the very end. It hones in on that discomfort, that claustrophobia of squeezing and fitting yourself into a role, like Mary Shelley did, like Emily Bronte did. That eerie distrust that female horror writers capture so well that makes you question whether we are all just pretending humanness. In summary, normal people scare me, men cannot be trusted, and cats are freaking awesome. We're on the same wavelength, Shirley and I. I rated this 4 stars as it was a short story collection, and I rarely rate short story collections 5 stars. There's always a few I like more than others, but the majority loved that final story. Shaking in my boots. If you haven't read Shirley Jackson, what are you doing? I'm gonna haunt you. Okay. I just realized I'm wearing this crown still. That's freaking awesome. Where Oh, doesn't he look cute? Doesn't he look freaking cute? We kind of match. Paradise Rot is a foul little novel. It follows a foreign student who begins to study in a new city and moves into a share house in a renovated old brewery. In this big, tin, echoey space, her and her housemate can hear each other's every movement, and they begin to be obsessed with one another. Fungi grows in corners, mold blooms on the ceiling, fruit rots on the counter. It's basically your average Fitzroy share house. As the two women exist almost on top of each other, the grossness of being human really comes out. I've never read about bodily fluids so much, about piss so much. There is a lot of piss in this book. A lot of piss. But I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm not enjoying it. I don't have a piss thing. The grossness is offset by this really dreamy prose, and you're not quite sure what's real and what is happening. Lesbian mitosis. How beautiful. I do, however, wish there was a little more normalcy at the start in order to contrast what comes later. I feel like that would have made it a little bit more effective, as it felt kind of one note throughout. I still really enjoyed this. I rated it 4 stars, and I stick by that. Shy takes place over the span of a few hours, and we are enveloped into the mind of a teenage boy named Shy who is deeply troubled. He breaks out of the behavioral facility where he's living with a backpack full of stones, makes his way to the pond, whilst being bombarded by voices in his head. The voices in his head weave with memory, and we learn about what has led him to this point. He has done horrible things, some he regrets, some he doesn't. He has had horrible things done to him, and at his core, he is a boy in so much pain. This is such an interesting look at mentally ill teenage boys. It doesn't shy away or try to justify his actions and behaviors. Instead, we come to understand why he does what he does, and honestly, the hell of being in his brain and suffering like he does. It's a tiny novella told in a stream of consciousness style with a lot of typographical emphasis for the different voices and the memory. If you don't like Max Porter's other work, if you don't like stream of consciousness, zero punctuation writing, this is not for you. But I just loved this. I love this. I really love Max Porter's writing. There's such a tenderness to it that really feels respectful to his subjects. I found this did not lean into caricature or stereotypes. I rated it 4 stars because there was an element to it I just don't think I understood. Maybe I need to reread this. I think I read it on like December 29th or something. I need to do a reread because there's like a time travel no, I don't know if that's what it is. I'm not going to say that. I'll reread it. I'm happy with 4 stars though. Max Porter, man. I finally read Crush by Richard Seiken, which has quite a cult following online, and it was a lot. It hurtles forward at this insane pace, and every poem feels like you're being shot with a machine gun. Like every line has a punch and a meaning. It's honestly incredible that he's able to maintain that energy throughout. It's about queer love, the violence in oppression and repression. It's about addiction and obsession, and it's very erotic at times. It's just charged with so much. If you want to devour a collection that feels heated and frenzied and twisted, then this is for you. I will say I wish I'd read this when it first came out as a baby, I guess. It's a shame to admit, but I think this is a case of the original being tainted by the imitation, as I realize I've read so many Richard Seiken wannabes, so much bad poetry in this style, obviously imitating Seiken, but now I sort of associate that style with bad poetry or moody Tumblr text posts. I rated this 4 stars. I'm happy with that. I definitely feel like I'm going to pick it up and revisit certain parts. Some of those lines truly winded me, And if you can have that effect in so few words, then I can only imagine the effect of his gay Sherlock and supernatural fanfiction. You think I'm joking? You think I'm joking? Look it up, Google it. He's real for that. He's so real for that. Every year there's an author that defines my reading year. It's usually, but not always, the author I read the most work of. 2022 was absolutely my year of Deborah Levy, and 2023 was, without a doubt, my year of Jamaica Kincaid. The last 4 books I'm going to talk about, thank God I'm so tired, are all by Jamaica Kincaid, and I thought it just easiest to give a quick rundown on who she is and sort of the themes she explores. Kincaid was born in St. John's, Antigua, a really small island in the Caribbean, and she attributes her writing to her mother's love of reading. Apparently, as a girl, she would annoy her mother by interrupting her reading time, so her mother was desperate to get Kincaid into reading so they could each read in peace. Her first published collection, At the Bottom of the River, contains poems and short stories, and perhaps her most well-known piece, Girl, which is this repetitive instructional poem, advice from a mother to her daughter on the right way to be a woman. This collection verges into magical realism. The structure is dreamlike and loose. Central to her work is the complexity of mother-daughter relationships and the complexity of home, place as a living, breathing entity that can be a guardian and protector or punisher and abuser, and how these colonial structures inform everything. The complexity of colonial history is really explored in Autobiography of My Mother, one of her early novels in which a 70-something-year-old woman recounts the story of her life, from her birth, which marked her mother's death, this detachment, this early otherness, allowing her a vantage point in which to observe the world around her, her constant companion, herself, her body, her mind, her sense of self. It really looks at colonial identity, specifically of woman and girl, not lady or mademoiselle, but those descended from both the vanquished and vanquisher, who are never simply man, but of people, as she puts it. The protagonist considers everything around her and within her, and in one very poignant passage, she comments that for one man, freedom is lazing on a beach. For another, it's anthems of broken chains. Autobiography of My Mother is probably my least favorite of Kincaid's work. It might be more like 3 stars. It was a little difficult to read at times. I kept kind of like losing my place on the page within the sentence. I don't think I'd ever read Kincaid's work and not get something valuable out of it. And the protagonist of this one is so unique in that the detachment is part of her, is her. So you can never connect with her. It's kind of the point. Doesn't make for the easiest reading experience. I don't know, there's a lot to consider. As with all of Kincaid's work, I finish her books and then I think about them for like months afterwards. Love you, Queen. If you are looking to get into Kincaid's work, I would recommend starting with Lucy. Lucy is about Lucy. Lucy is a teenage girl from the West Indies who arrives in Manhattan to work as an au pair. The family she works for insists that she treat them more like family than employers, although with time she begins to see cracks in their perfect facade. Kincaid herself was sent away as a teenager to work as a servant. She says she didn't hate au pairing in Manhattan but craved independence, so got a job as a receptionist. She got her big break when a magazine agreed to let her write a piece on Gloria Steinem if she could get a hold of Gloria Steinem and interview her. So Kincaid called Miss Magazine, and Gloria Steinem agreed to speak to her, agreed to an interview out of a solidarity for women. So cool. Lucy, at first, as a narrator, is hard to penetrate. She's cold without being cruel, and she represses her pain, wearing her sharp intelligence as a shield. For Lucy to be defined or controlled by anyone but herself is an unimaginable option. She spent a life in a village where everybody knows her. And the thing is, in order to move forward, she must sever herself completely from her old self, her old life, from her family. She wanders the city, she buys a camera, she explores her sexuality. It was really refreshing to read a really confident and curious narrator. At its core, this feels like a daughter's attempt to sever the umbilical cord, to detach completely and separate mind and heart. And there's this moment where she falters, and we understand all of a sudden why she must be the way she is. Such a good book. A Small Place is an essay that explores the effects and ethics of tourism on Antigua. Using the conventions of a guidebook, Kincaid subverts expectations by taking us through the current corruption on the island, the history of British colonization, and the Western tourists that have made the island their playground with no regard for the locals. And in this very direct second person, Kincaid spews exactly what she means, pulls no punches, in a way so typical of her. I just love the way she writes what she wants without kind of consideration for the reader. It's like, no, she's going to say what she has to say. And if it reaches you, what you think about it is your problem. It's your business. She's going to write what she needs to write. So fire. It's about the absolute absurdity of tourism in these paradises that are struggling so deeply. There are so many interesting comparisons to be drawn between colonization and tourism, and Kincaid does it so deftly with such a directness. It's a must read, I think, for any tourist, and a really interesting look at the ethics of traveling in general and where you choose to go, where you choose to spend your money, who you choose to spend your money on, and the cost of that. This was not an easy read content wise, but quite eye opening, and I'd honestly recommend it to everyone. And that's it. Those are all the books I read. Some I loved, some I hated. If I hated any that you loved and you wish to send me hate mail, this is who you're hurting. Oh, it's past his bedtime. Thank you for watching. The whole hook of this video was that I was going to change ratings and like take some people down a peg, but I didn't do that. Sorry, clickbaited again. Sucker. When will you learn? Here's to another great year of books. I've set my goal to 55 books. I do plan to read the entire Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, so I think I've got it in the bag. If you want to see me make any specific videos, let me know. What was the best book you read last year? What was the worst, actually? That's more fun. Tell me the worst book you read. And yeah, thank you for watching and supporting me. And you can follow me other places if you want. It'll probably be in the bio. Maybe I'll put it up here as well. Okay. Love you. Bye.